Imagine a luxurious estate in the heart of Windsor Great Park, where the royal family's hidden intrigues unfold like a dark thriller. Forest Lodge, ostensibly just a new home for William and Catherine, but in reality a cunning strike that could shatter Meghan Markle and Prince Harry's dreams forever. This move isn't accidental, but a carefully planned attack, full of symbolism, where every garden bush and every bedroom harbors scandalous secrets capable of turning the perception of the monarchy upside down. What if I told you that behind the facade of a perfect lawn and tennis courts lies a story of betrayal that will make you doubt every smile of Catherine? Was Forest Lodge just a new home, or was it a hidden blow to Meghan Markle and Prince Harry? This question now troubles not only the British press, but also analysts worldwide. What at first glance appears to be a simple move by William and Catherine to a new residence, upon closer inspection, reveals itself as an event fraught with deep symbolism. In a matter of days, the acquisition of the vast estate in Windsor Great Park has set in motion dynamics that extend far beyond the garden architecture and the walls of the buildings. Forest Lodge has unexpectedly found itself at the epicenter of discussions about status, perception, and the delicate balance of power within the royal family. The estate itself is breathtaking. With its spacious lawns, private lake, manicured rose gardens, and 8 bedrooms, it seems like the perfect backdrop for a modern fairy tale. Add to that the tennis courts, wide driveways, and a level of privacy rarely found in the vicinity of royal palaces. However, what truly caught the attention of observers was not the luxury of the structure, but how William and Catherine organized their move, or rather, how they didn't organize it. No detailed interviews, no sensational press releases, no self-promotion. Instead, a brief statement that the couple is paying for the purchase of around $16 million from their personal funds. No taxpayer money, no subsidies from the royal budget, no external sponsorship contracts. In a period when public opinion of the monarchy is fluctuating and demanding greater transparency, this emphasis has become a real breakthrough. While Meghan and Harry are still grappling with the fallout from criticism over the cost of renovating Frogmore Cottage, William and Catherine are presented as role models. The signal is clear. Here lives a couple who takes responsibility, acts independently, and embodies the traditional yet modern spirit that many expect from the monarchy. The media reaction was immediate. British newspapers described Forest Lodge as a quiet demonstration of power and emphasized that Catherine is repositioning herself as a symbol of stability and elegance. Commentators even called it a perfect move at the right moment, giving the Prince and Princess of Wales a decisive advantage in the unofficial race for sympathy, especially in comparison with the Sussexes' media strategies, which rely on interviews, Netflix productions, and podcasts. This move looked even more contrasting. But Forest Lodge is more than just a place of residence. It is a symbol. In a family whose identity is defined by icons such as Buckingham Palace, Kensington Palace, or Sandringham, choosing the right estate means much more than comfort. It reflects who has the upper hand in the perception game. And in this case, Catherine, thanks to her quiet elegance, has achieved a resounding victory. Without saying a word against Meghan, without engaging in open confrontation, she has taken center stage subtly but effectively. This raises questions that go beyond personal rivalries. What does it mean when public opinion increasingly rewards those who are silent and act, rather than those who share their story with the world? Does it reflect a desire for stability, a monarchy based on tradition and discretion rather than newspaper headlines and documentaries? Or is it a sign that people are ultimately tired of constantly airing personal conflicts in public? It is also interesting that this move not only brought William and Catherine's support within the UK, but was also positively received internationally, including in the US, where Meghan and Harry have settled. Several leading newspapers commented on the move with a touch of admiration. Some spoke of a successful image refresh that could secure the future of the monarchy. Another dimension is linked to this. Forest Lodge is not only a symbol of the internal family power struggle, but also a strategic signal to the world. The silence with which the move took place was the opposite of noisy self-promotion, as if Catherine had perfectly mastered the art of inaction and thereby achieved a greater media effect than any Netflix production. The contrast could hardly be starker, while Meghan is supposedly working on formats that should give her back control over the interpretation of her story. Catherine writes her story with actions, not words. At the same time, the temporal context cannot be ignored. The monarchy is under pressure. requiring a re-evaluation, and at the same time must provide stability. In a world of political uncertainty, geopolitical tensions, and social upheaval, the image of a calm, reliable family is becoming increasingly attractive. Thus, Forest Lodge is not just a home, but a quiet testament to the royal family's ability to fulfill this role. In Germany and France, leading media outlets also used the event to speculate about the future of the monarchy. Many commentators saw it as a sign that William and Catherine are capable of leading the monarchy into the future, combining tradition with modern restraint. One of them, in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, wrote that with this step, Catherine found the balance between modernity and history that others only strive for. In the end, the question remains, was Forest Lodge really just a move, or a targeted move in the invisible chess game of the royal family? Who will determine the perception of the royal family in the future? Those who loudly tell their stories, or those who quietly send clear signals? The answer to this question will determine not only if we are talking about a shattered dream, then this expression probably best describes what Meghan Markle apparently experienced with regard to Forest Lodge. Years before William and Catherine got the keys to this estate, it was Meghan, according to rumors, who fell in love with the idea of one day starting her chapter there as a modern royal. The idea of living in a house of such scale and symbolic significance perfectly matched her then self-perception, a woman who wanted to combine tradition and modernity with Harry. In this vision, Forest Lodge represented not only comfort, but also status, recognition, and the fulfillment of a dream that now turned out to be in the hands of her sister-in-law. The story began when Meghan and Harry were still at the center of attention of the British royal family, and their relationship with the public was surrounded by a wave of curiosity and charm. At a time when the press did not yet consider them disunifiers, but celebrated them as bearers of hope, the thought of Forest Lodge seemed like a logical continuation of this growing story. Reports indicate that Meghan and Harry even toured the estate, drawing a picture for themselves as they walked through the extensive gardens and admired the chic facade. In this fantasy, it was their moment, visible proof that they had won a solid place in the royal world. But reality turned out to be different. After the turbulent events of leaving their active role in the royal family and moving to California, Forest Lodge remained unattainable. Instead, the Sussexes invested millions in renovating Frogmore Cottage, an estate that is significantly inferior in size and symbolic significance to Forest Lodge. Harsh criticism from the British press regarding the costs only reinforced the feeling that, despite the investment and efforts, they had not achieved the desired prestige. When William and Catherine claimed their rights to the estate, this old dream became a mirror for Meghan, a mirror that reflected not only past hopes, but also the painful realization that someone else, and above all Catherine, had realized what she once wanted for herself. Reports from insider circles paint a picture of a woman who is reminded of this loss with every new detail about the move to Forest Lodge. From the size of the kitchen to the design of the gardens and the financial aspects, everything must be like salt in an old wound. Add to this the comparison with her current life in Montecito. Although her Californian villa is also impressive and valued among celebrities, in the public perception, it does not seem to cause the same sparkle as an estate with royal history. Forest Lodge is rooted in centuries of tradition, drawing its aura not only from luxury but also from symbolic depth. Montecito, on the other hand, at least in the perception of many critics, looks like an attempt to gain brilliance and prestige without the cultural significance that British estates like Forest Lodge automatically give. Therefore, a multifaceted question arises. Did Meghan ever only care about the house, or was she rather seeking recognition within an institution that never gave her the desired place? Was Forest Lodge a dream of a house for her, or rather a dream of recognition? Interestingly, it is this unfulfilled dream that can be interpreted as a symbol of the different paths that the two couples are taking. William and Catherine follow the path of quiet consistency, using their position without overly emphasizing it, and receiving recognition for it. Meghan and Harry, on the other hand, are betting on loud self-promotion, but in doing so they are constantly facing rejection. In this dynamic, Forest Lodge is more than just a place. It is a marker showing how different strategies lead to different results. Psychologists studying public figures note that experiencing such a loss can lead to an obsession. When a goal closely associated with self-esteem and identity is not achieved, people tend to return to the missed opportunity again and again. This is what seems to be happening with Meghan. Every new photo, every headline about Forest Lodge becomes an excuse for comparisons that further exacerbate her disappointment. The public watches this spectacle with a mixture of fascination and skepticism. On the one hand, it is curious how much one estate can influence the dynamics within a world-famous family. On the other hand, the question arises whether Meghan and Harry, by dwelling on such symbols as Forest Lodge, are not at risk of forever solidifying their history in the shadow of the Wales family. Thus, the unfulfilled dream of Forest Lodge remains not only a personal failure for Meghan, but also a symbol of how much status symbols in the royal environment can determine success or failure in public perception. And at the same time, the question remains open. Will Meghan ever be able to achieve a similar victory, or will she have to live with the memory that Catherine realized a dream that once belonged to her? In today's media world, often the decisive factor is not reality itself, but how it is told. This is what the contrast between William and Catherine on the one hand, and Meghan and Harry on the other, shows. While the couple from Wales, with their silence and restraint, creates an image of stability and dignity, the Sussexes rely on words, interviews, podcasts, and television appearances. This contrast has become even more apparent after the move to Forest Lodge. On the one hand, a quiet but effective signal of an independent and traditional decision. On the other hand, loud attempts to attract attention and sympathy through ever-new stories. It is especially striking how differently the public reacts to these strategies. William and Catherine are praised in the media for their restraint. The sober fact that they pay for real estate out of their own pocket has proved sufficient to present them in headlines as exemplary. Their position corresponds to the image that many expect from a modern monarchy, respecting traditions, but transparent, self-confident, but unobtrusive. Catherine, in particular, embodies this ideal. Her appearances at official events, a combination of restraint and stylish presence, reinforce the image of a woman capable of leading the royal family into the future. Meghan and Harry, on the other hand, face a completely different narrative. Despite the villa in California, numerous projects, and international media presence, their public image is increasingly criticized by many observers. Critics emphasize that their messages too often contradict actions. The message of down-to-earthness comes into conflict with luxurious real estate and million-dollar contracts. The claim to tell their truth looks less authentic when it is repeatedly presented in the form of profitable media projects. The media plays a key role here. In Britain, many newspapers celebrate William and Catherine as the quiet pillars of the monarchy. Their restraint is interpreted as a force that reinforces authority. In the US, on the other hand, Meghan and Harry are still haunted by tabloids, but the mood is also increasingly changing there. In editorial articles of major newspapers, it is noted that constant self-promotion can be tiring. In this context, Forest Lodge has become a symbol. While William and Catherine give the impression that they are going into the future with tranquility and independence, Meghan and Harry look as if they continue to struggle with the past. The public loves contrasts, and it is this contrast that reinforces the impression of an unbalanced game of power. On the one hand, Catherine, who shines in the headlines, walking through the garden and smiling. On the other hand, Meghan, whose strategies have an effect thanks to carefully thought-out productions, but are always perceived with skepticism. Experts emphasize that this perception is related not so much to the real personality, but to the context in a world where authenticity is a key value orientation. Silence is sometimes considered more convincing than any explanation. Time also plays an important role. While geopolitical crises, economic uncertainty, and social tensions determine everyday life, many people crave symbols of stability. Catherine satisfies this need precisely, not by speaking out loudly, but by remaining quiet and present. Meghan, on the other hand, is associated with headlines about dramas or conflicts, and it is this that exacerbates the gap between statements and real impact. Interestingly, even in social networks, where Meghan traditionally could count on a younger and international audience, discussions are becoming increasingly critical. Comments ask, why does every step of the Sussexes have to be inflated in the media, while William and Catherine are quietly perceived as winners? This dynamic shows how much public perception depends on comparison. It is not absolute behavior that is important, but relative behavior. Who looks more reasonable and who looks more eccentric? Thus, Forest Lodge has become the center of a broader discussion. The house symbolizes quiet elegance, which looks attractive in a world that is becoming increasingly noisy. Catherine didn't have to explain anything, didn't have to justify herself. Silence in itself has become a message that has been perceived more strongly than any media staging. But this situation also raises a deeper question. What role does media strategy play for the future of the monarchy? If Catherine, with her restraint, receives so much approval, does that mean that Meghan and Harry, with their more vocal strategy, will lose in the long run? Or will there ever be a turning point when people will once again demand candid words and spectacular stories? Another element that should not be underestimated in this context is the symbolic power of real estate in royal history. Palaces, estates, and residences are not just buildings, they are manifestations of status and influence. How they are acquired, used, and presented tells a story deeply rooted in people's minds. Thus, Forest Lodge fits into a long tradition that includes Windsor, Balmoral, and Sandringham. But unlike these historic palaces, it embodies a modern form of power, quiet, privately funded, but with enormous symbolic significance. The difference in perception between the two couples could hardly be greater. While William and Catherine are considered winners in the game of silence, Meghan and Harry seem stuck in the role of those who explain, justify, and fight for attention. This contrast has made Forest Lodge much more than just a residence. It has become a benchmark against which to compare two very different strategies of royal lifestyle. The question remains, in the age of media, can you really win by being silent? Or is it only a matter of time before Catherine and William are forced to tell their story louder? While Forest Lodge in the headlines is primarily associated with Catherine, some attention is increasingly turning to Harry. After all, for him, this estate apparently means much more than just a property that his sister-in-law now calls home. It is a symbol of loss of status, influence, and belonging, and therefore a constant source of inner conflict. Sources report that Harry is not simply shrugging off this situation, but that this topic bothers him greatly. In his eyes, Forest Lodge is the embodiment of what he himself could have had if he had stayed, made different decisions, or simply been more patient. From a psychological point of view, such a position is not unusual. Whoever breaks away from a community loses not only privileges, but also the symbols that these privileges represent. Harry's situation shows how deep this loss of belonging is. While his brother William now resides in an estate symbolizing stability and continuity, Harry is in California, engaged in projects, making deals, and giving media interviews, which, of course, allows him to stay in the spotlight, but hardly creates an impression of stability. The contrast could hardly be more striking. This inner division is particularly evident in reports of how strongly Harry tends to question past decisions again and again. Insiders describe him as someone who constantly returns to the question in private conversations. What if? What if he hadn't left Frogmore Cottage? What if he hadn't burned bridges with the family so early? What if he had accepted the role that was intended for him? These thought experiments are a manifestation of a psychological pattern known as obsessive rumination, a constant return to scenarios that can no longer be changed, but that still overshadow the present. Added to this is another aspect. Harry sees himself in an unequal rivalry with his brother. While William is following the path of royal succession, he himself has bet on freedom and self-determination, and now feels how painful the consequences can be. In this rivalry, Forest Lodge becomes a visible trophy that reminds him every time that he is out of the game. In public perception, Harry also plays a complex role. In the eyes of many observers, he looks like a person stuck between two worlds. He is no longer part of the royal machine, but he has not fully found a new identity either. Projects with streaming services or interviews attract attention in the short term, but at the same time reinforce the image of a person who cannot let go of the past. This image is reinforced the more often he returns to the past in his public statements. At the same time, it should be taken into account that Harry's inner division is fueled not only by rivalry or envy, rather, it is about a deeper identity crisis. For decades, he was raised in a structure that shaped his self-awareness. Breaking with this structure has opened up new freedoms for him, but also created a vacuum that is not so easy to fill. In this complex situation, Forest Lodge is more of a trigger than a cause, a symbol that reopens old wounds and reveals unresolved issues. It is remarkable how calmly William approaches this situation. No reactions, no comments, no interviews. This silence only amplifies Harry's anxiety. While the older brother seems to effortlessly embrace the role of future king, Harry is struggling to find a new role independent of the past. The contrast between the calmness of one and the anxiety of the other is what many observers describe as significant differences. In this context, the question arises, will Harry ever be able to turn his division into a new strength? Will he be able to develop an identity that is not determined by loss without comparing himself to William? Or will he remain trapped in a cycle of comparisons, disappointments, and unfulfilled expectations? Experts in public perception also see a dilemma in this situation. As long as Harry focuses on what he has lost, he will remain in the public eye as the missing prince stuck in the past. Only by creating new symbols that embody stability, authenticity, and success will he be able to break out of this circle. However, creating such symbols is much more difficult than relying on existing structures. The debate around Forest Lodge makes this particularly clear. For William and Catherine, buying the house was a simple step, but for Harry, it has become a symbol of a more extensive loss. And it is this symbolism that makes his inner division more noticeable than it would be without this comparison. Ultimately, the crucial question arises, will Harry be able to reconcile with his decisions, or will he continue to see Forest Lodge as a symbol of what has forever eluded him for a long time? Meghan's approach to the Forest Lodge situation reveals a remarkable strategy. She is trying to capitalize on a personal setback by creating a new narrative story. Instead of silently accepting defeat, she apparently bets on using this story to her advantage, be it through media projects, interviews, or creative formats that place the topic in a broader context. Insiders report that ideas are emerging for documentaries or series in which real estate will be presented as a symbol of power, history, and identity. The plan is to use Forest Lodge as a starting point to regain her own interpretive power. This approach reflects a well-known model in Meghan's media strategy. Since leaving the royal family, she has been trying to turn every significant event into a narrative in which she and Harry are the main characters. Netflix documentaries, podcasts, and interviews follow this principle to make personal experience a public topic and thereby assert control over one's own story. However, a dilemma arises regarding Forest Lodge. The narrative of loss and missed opportunity is difficult to fit into a positive, inspiring framework. Instead, it threatens to reinforce the perception of bitterness. Media reactions clearly show this. While British newspapers mainly report on the topic critically, international observers are also skeptical of the attempt to confront it. In the United States, where Meghan initially enjoyed more sympathy, there is a growing number of voices wondering, won't the constant new projects related to royal conflicts eventually become tiresome? Staging Forest Lodge as a white whale in a personal drama may ultimately generate less interest than expected. At the same time, the cunning of this strategy should not be underestimated. Meghan knows how to personalize topics and thereby evoke emotions. In an era when attention is currency, even a lost home can be a reason for new headlines. However, it remains questionable whether this will improve the image in the long term. Many experts consider it more of a short-term tactic that does not evoke lasting sympathy. This is especially evident in contrast to Catherine's behavior. While Meghan is developing ideas for projects that reflect her point of view, Catherine is acting quietly, renovating, furnishing, avoiding publicity, and receiving much more approval for it. The contrast looks like an undesirable mirror image. The one who speaks less seems to get more approval. The one who puts themselves in the center of attention more often evokes skepticism. Added to this is another factor. The public compares Meghan not only to Catherine, but also to themselves. Many wonder why a woman living in a California estate with all possible luxuries continues to cling to symbols that she should have left in the past long ago. This contradiction reinforces the impression that Meghan is more interested in symbols than in content. An interesting question arises. Can defeat be turned into a story that is perceived as strength, or will the image of an unrealized dream remain so strong that any counter-strategy is doomed to fail? Examples from politics and show business show that rethinking is possible, but this usually requires a clear break with old patterns. However, in Meghan's case, such a break does not seem to be happening. She remains in a vicious circle characterized by reaction to reaction without developing her own vision. From an economic point of view, the question of sustainability also arises. Streaming services and media companies only invest in formats that promise to attract attention. But the more often the same conflicts are raised, the less the surprise effect. Forest Lodge may be good for headlines in the short term, but it is doubtful that it will become the basis for a successful format. Another project dedicated to royal real estate or missed opportunities may be perceived by viewers as repetition rather than innovation. A noticeable shift is also observed in public discussion. If Meghan was previously considered a symbol of modernity, diversity, and change, she is now increasingly associated with concepts such as fixation or staging. Forest Lodge reinforces this trend as it is an example of an attempt to profit from personal loss, an attempt that does not look very authentic in the eyes of many. But despite the fact that public opinion now seems clear, the question remains open. Can Meghan still turn the tide by presenting Forest Lodge not as a lost symbol, but as a lesson? If she manages to turn the narrative of defeat into a narrative of a new beginning, the situation may change. However, this requires abandoning previous strategies and showing a willingness to define a new role that goes beyond royal rivalry. Thus, the situation remains ambiguous. Meghan is trying to emerge from the shadow of Forest Lodge and create her own story. But the more she does this, the stronger the contrast with Catherine becomes, whose silence speaks louder than any planned project. It is unknown whether these strategies will bring the desired effect, and this is the main question. Can you really win if your own stories are always overshadowed by the actions of others? In the end, Forest Lodge remains more than just an estate. It is a quiet but powerful symbol of how power and perception can change within the British royal family. While Meghan and Harry try to actively shape their story through narratives, interviews, and projects, William and Catherine show that restraint and actions without unnecessary words are often more effective. Moving to Forest Lodge suddenly made this dynamic visible. No hype, no campaign, no attempts to dominate the headlines, and yet a triumph in the eyes of the public. This quiet elegance is the key to the victory of the Wales family. Each step of Catherine embodies exactly what many expect from a modern monarchy: calmness, stability, and the ability to carry traditions into the present without burdening them with drama. Her role is strengthened by the fact that she does not fight for attention with loud statements, but gains trust through actions. William, in turn, demonstrates financial independence when acquiring Forest Lodge, showing that future monarchs can also take responsibility, a signal that is crucial in an era of growing skepticism about the crown's spending. In direct comparison, Meghan and Harry lose charisma not because their activities or projects are insignificant, but because they look too reactive in the eyes of the public. Every time William and Catherine take a step that is distinguished by calmness and dignity, Meghan and Harry follow them with a media response that is inevitably perceived as a contrast. This dynamic reinforces the image of an endless cycle. One couple silently gains recognition, and the other loudly fights for the right to interpret. The international resonance reinforces this impression. Commentators in Europe and the United States emphasize that Forest Lodge is not just a house, but a manifesto. It shows how a monarchy can function in the 21st century, not so much through pomp and staged events, but through responsibility and restraint. In a world full of uncertainty, these qualities have a stabilizing effect. This is the true strength of William and Catherine. However, this victory is not final, but is part of a larger game. The question remains, how long will the strategy of silence work? Will the public continue to reward patience and restraint in the future, or will there at some point be a desire for greater openness, stories, and details? For Meghan and Harry, in turn, the question arises, can they define their role outside of comparisons? As long as Forest Lodge serves as a benchmark, they remain in the role of those who must imitate. The symbolic meaning of the word home, which is constantly found in connection with Forest Lodge, is also interesting. For Meghan and Harry, Frogmore Cottage was never more than a temporary solution, a compromise. For William and Catherine, on the contrary, Forest Lodge now embodies stability. This small linguistic detail reinforces the gap in the narrative. Here, permanence and calmness; there, changeability and constant reinterpretation. Another point that many experts emphasize is the effect of strategic silence. By not responding to possible criticism, Catherine and William prevent the emergence of debates that could harm them. Any restraint becomes a silent statement. Meghan and Harry, on the contrary, create new headlines with each answer, headlines that often do not correspond to their intentions. This reinforces the impression of a clear but unspoken victory with Forest Lodge. William and Catherine not only acquired a house, but also received a narrative that increases their value in the eyes of the public. Meghan and Harry, on the contrary, are faced with the challenge of not looking like losers in a game that they themselves initiated. The question remains, is there a way for the Sussexes to break out of this spiral, or will Forest Lodge forever remain a symbol of their missed opportunities? For the Wales family, in turn, this can become the basis for a new stage. This is a stage in which they will show that the monarchy can exist in the 21st century as well. Forest Lodge, a magnificent estate in Windsor Great Park, has become much more than just a residence in recent months. William and Catherine's move to this residence has become a quiet but powerful symbol of a new era in the British monarchy. By acquiring this property without using tax funds or the royal budget, they sent a clear signal of their responsibility and independence. In an era when transparency and restraint are particularly valued in the public consciousness, this move looked like a masterful move in the royal game of chess. For Meghan Markle, this moment was a painful blow. Forest Lodge was once considered her dream property, which she allegedly viewed with Harry. Now it is Catherine who has settled within these historic walls, embodying the status that Meghan once aspired to. This personal disappointment has become a symbol of what Meghan believes she has lost: recognition, influence, and the opportunity to be part of long-term royal history. Public opinion reinforces this contrast. While William and Catherine win sympathy with their silence and tranquility, Meghan and Harry seem loud and reactive. Their projects, from Netflix productions to interviews, may attract attention, but they do not convey the stability that Forest Lodge now symbolizes. This contrast has led to the Sussexes being increasingly perceived as impulsive, while the Wales family strengthens its power through restraint. Harry, in particular, is at the center of internal division. Forest Lodge reminds him of missed opportunities and unresolved issues, which further emphasizes his distance from the royal family. His reflections on alternative life paths reinforce the image of a man stuck between the past and the present. Meghan, in turn, is trying to reimagine this topic through media projects, using Forest Lodge as a starting point for stories or documentaries. However, this approach risks reinforcing her fixation on symbols and further fueling public skepticism. Catherine, on the other hand, proves that silence and actions without words can often be more effective than any performance. Thus, the story of Forest Lodge ends for now with a clear, albeit unspoken, victory for William and Catherine. They not only acquired a home, but also gained a narrative that brought them international recognition. For Meghan and Harry, the question remains: will they manage to break free from this spiral of comparisons, or will Forest Lodge forever remain a symbol of missed opportunities?